It's time to begin our first afternoon session, session 2, entitled Fostering Sustainable Path to North Korean Denuclearization, the role of US-Korea alliance, a very exciting subject to talk about. I have four distinguished speakers and one discussant. I'll give 10 minutes to each speaker, and I have hired a couple of birds that'll let you know 10 minutes have passed. Okay? When you hear birds singing, then that means it's time to wrap your presentation up, just to lighten up. Okay, why don't we begin with In-han Kim's presentation. In-han, please.
Okay, thank you so much. And I would like to give thanks to Peace and Democracy Institute of Korea University, Center for Strategic and International Studies, and the Department of Unification. It is my privilege to be a part of this event. So the title of my talk today is Allocate U.S. Alliance as a Vehicle for Denuclearization of North Korea. What I want to highlight through my talk is that a robust ROK U.S. alliance is a beginning and an end of the road of DPRK denuclearization. Let me start. So both ROK and the U.S. have employed a mix of coercive and diplomatic measures to denuclearize North Korea. Economic sanctions have been tightened up since the beginning of nuclear crisis, yet economic sanctions have failed to frustrate North Korea's determination to be a nuclear state. Similarly, diplomatic approaches have always ended up in a big disappointment. Sunshine policy and other forms of engagement policies have only bought Pyongyang time and resources to advance nuclear capabilities. Other diplomatic overtures from Seoul and Washington have offered Pyongyang cosmetics to cover its criminal face under innocent look. Not many options are left, but I can think of two. One is a threat to use military force, yet it is unrealistic. North Koreans' nuclear assets are known to spread around, including some areas close to Chinese border. So bombing around Chinese border is dangerous, and surgical airstrikes wouldn't be able to wipe out Pyongyang's nuclear arsenals. So it will certainly invite retaliations and escalation. So this scenario won't be welcomed not just by Seoul, but also by Tokyo. So another option I can think of is stronger economic sanctions. In case of another nuclear or missile test, the United Nations get together to impose another tightening sanctions on Pyongyang. But it is not an opportune moment to mobilize collective sanctions. The United Nations is in a limbo because of splits among great powers. So setting up North Korea's provocation as an agenda inside the chamber of the United Nations Security Council might be difficult because the UNSC is divided. So even the very first step to discuss sanctions measures might be impossible. Let's imagine that so things work well and then UNSC manages to decide sanctions on North Korea, but whether the sanctions would inflict pains on North Korea is another matter. And we know that there is a potential spoiler, that is China. Beijing has been a lifeline to Pyongyang, and in many cases, Pyongyang has been a strategic liability to Beijing, yet Pyongyang still has strategic values. It is a buffer, and it is a tool for soft balancing against Washington, and it causes occasional headaches to the United States, and Pyongyang is useful in diverting Washington's enmity. Otherwise, it is reverted on Beijing. So there are ample reasons to believe that China will be reluctant to implement sanctions faithfully. It has little strategic reasons to share commitment to punishing North Korea's nuclear provocations. So the disappointing record and inherent limitations of remaining options help us realize one thing. That is, denuclearization of North Korea will be extremely difficult, though not impossible. It will take long, and the path will be extremely strenuous. Then what should we do? My argument is that we should start from making the ROK-US alliance strong and stronger. The alliance has been successful in deterring North Korea's attempt to change status quo on the peninsula more than 7 decades. It has also strategic values in frustrating Pyongyang's nuclear ambitions. A strong US-ROK alliance will make North Korea realize any advancement in its nuclear capability futile, militarily and economically. So first, militarily, Pyongyang will understand that it cannot coerce Seoul when it sees Washington stand side by side with Seoul. The combined defense capabilities of the ally are stronger than the conventional and nuclear capabilities of North Korea. Seoul has no nuclear weapons, but the US has. So Pyongyang's nuclear coercion, any coercion against Seoul, would not work if Seoul feels that the US commitment to the defense of South Korea is reliable. In other words, a strong US-ROK alliance is an instrument to help North Korea recognize that its nuclear weapons have little use. Second, economically speaking, a robust US-ROK alliance is a tool to make North Korea drain its scarce resources. Both Seoul and Washington have upgraded their missile defense capabilities in response to the progress of North Korea's nuclear capabilities. Seoul's decision to deploy THAAD system despite Beijing's fierce opposition is a good example in question. So Pyongyang's progress in nuclear capabilities and its delivery system has encouraged Seoul and Washington to devise their own shields. In turn, North Korea would have to sophisticate and diversify further its weapons to successfully penetrate the two enemies' nuclear missile defense. Then the defense built up by ROK and US would follow. So this is a classic case of an arms race. It will add economic hardship to Pyongyang in grinding poverty. Pyongyang will realize that its nuclear programs are economically wasteful. So the ROK-US alliance is now stronger than ever before. They have upgraded their relations to the level of a global, comprehensive strategic alliance. The two great states' military capabilities are solid, but unwavering commitment to the defense is more important than mere capabilities. Given this context, recent developments are promising. The US has put into concrete actions the spirit of the Washington Declaration in April. It delivers a clear signal to Pyongyang that any hope to change status quo in the peninsula by force is simply illusionary. So let me conclude. The disappointing record and inherent limitations of remaining options help us realize just one thing. Denuclearization of North Korea will be extremely difficult. It will take long and the path will be difficult, strenuous. Then what should we do? My argument is that we should start from the basics. And the basics starts from making ROK-US alliance strong and stronger. Again, it is the beginning and the end of the path to the denuclearization of DPRK. Thank you.
All right, thank you. And Dr. Hwang Tae-hee, you're up next. Tae, please.
Thank you very much for inviting me over this great seminar. I'm going to talk about how to foster sustainable denuclearization of North Korea, especially from the ROK-US alliance perspectives. So I want to start by emphasizing how it's difficult to make North Korea give up on its nuclear programs. So the difficulty lies in general factors and factors that are specific to North Korea's current situations. So let me go over briefly one by one. So first, I see at least two obstacles in accomplishing denuclearization. One is the commitment problem, and the other is bargaining problem. So these are general problems that can be applied to theoretically to any non-proliferation bargaining. So first is commitment problem. And here the question is how to make Kim Jong-un believe the promise that the United States will not exploit the military weakness of North Korea after its denuclearization. So the textbook solution to this problem is that the United States or any guarantor should provide North Korea with a credible commitment mechanism. And I think that guarantor should be the United States. But however, especially these days, United States, whether Republican government or Democratic government, I think seems to have neither intention or capability to offer such a credible deal to North Korea. Maybe North Korean nuclear program is too expensive. Maybe there is simply no trust whatsoever between the United States and North Korea. Whatever the reason is, the implication is that it will be very difficult to reach at any sort of denuclearization agreement that was possible in the 1994, but not really the case right now. The second is a bargaining problem. So North Korea clearly knows that it's almost impossible to go back when once denuclearization is complete. So knowing that cheating will not be possible, North Korea has every incentive to bargain harder today to get a better deal, which makes the negotiation itself more and more difficult. So this implies that it'll be very difficult for North Korea to just come to the table for denuclearization bargaining. So if you think about this denuclearization process as a stages by stage, the bargaining stage and agreement stage, at each stage there are serious theoretical problems. So what's the response of this Yoon government? I think Yoon Suk-yeol government suggested this audacious initiative. And I think this audacious initiative seems to understand these two problems quite well. So this audacious initiative suggests a stage roadmap for denuclearization of North Korea. How? By clarifying pre-bargaining stage, bargaining stage, and enforcement stage after the agreement. And the combinations of carrots and sticks are optimized at each stage. So I think this audacious initiative in that sense different from the previous package deal suggested by previous government in South Korea. So given that commitment problem and bargaining problems are assumed, I think there are still factors that are specific to North Korea's current situation that hinder giving up. Maybe learning, identity, and the level of nuclear weapons. The first, I think Kim Jong-il and Kim Jong-un should have learned from those who gave up nuclear programs, such as cases of Libya or now Ukraine. So they have probably not surprisingly had learning. Secondly, nuclear weapons state to North Korea became a national identity. So possessing nuclear weapons is more than just an issue of security. Now, I think it's a symbol for the regime itself, which makes Kim Jong-un difficult to give up. Third, compared to the cases of Iran, Libya, and any other proliferators, I think North Korea's nuclear programs are too advanced and expensive to buy out. So now we know that North Korea's denuclearization is extremely difficult because of these general problems and specific factors. So what should we do? Maybe we can just accept the reality by officially recognizing North Korea as a nuclear power. But I think the answer should be no for many reasons. But I can at least talk about two. First reason is that once we recognize North Korea will ask for arms reduction in North Korean peninsula, which will eventually lead to removal of U.S. troops in the south and so on, which cannot be accepted. Secondly, the reason is that North Korea will aim at revamping this NPT regime to recognize North Korea as a de jure and de facto nuclear weapons state, which also cannot be accepted. So, if we cannot accept, if we cannot recognize, then what should we do? And here is the kind of wavering hand. So I think we should try harder and harder to denuclearize North Korea. And as for the role of the US-ROK alliance, I would like to emphasize 3 points: deterrence, sanctions, and the combination strategy, as all suggested by the audacious initiative. So first is deterrence. So, audacious initiative has 3 stages, as I mentioned. So the first pre-bargaining stage proposes 3 D strategies: deterrence, dissuasion, and dialogue. And US-ROK alliance can focus on the first D, that is deterrence by punishment, by improving the credibility of extended nuclear deterrence. So one way to improve the credibility is to institutionalize the nuclear consultation group that was created as a result of Washington Consensus in April. So, for example, creating the NCG had an immediate effect of raising audience costs, thereby sending a costly signal to North Korea. So that was the immediate effect. Moreover, in the longer term, I think the creation of NCG can reduce information gap between US and ROK regarding nuclear capabilities. Also, I think the maintaining and institutionalizing nuclear consultation group can increase, I think, social capital of US and ROK military officers related to NCG. And all of them will contribute to reducing the incentive of United States to deviate from when the United States has to employ nuclear deterrence. So any sort of institutionalization that can reduce the incentive of the United States to defect when the moment of truth comes, I think that'll increase the credibility of the alliance. Second, economic sanctions. I understand that there is a widespread pessimism regarding UN sanctions and US unilateral sanctions against North Korea, maybe because of third country effect of China and so on. However, I believe that sanctions are necessary as a coercive mechanism to continue to impose costs on North Korea. So at the end of 2017, UN Security Council passed resolution 2397, and that's by far the strongest sanctions going on. And suppose, just thought process, so just suppose an extreme case in which security threat disappears from North Korea. However, still, North Korea may want to keep its nuclear weapons for many reasons. So in this situation, if sanctions continue to impose costs, the carrying cost of having nuclear weapons, I think North Korea will think again, of giving up. So therefore, sanctions will never be sufficient, but they can be very necessary. And the role of ROK-US alliance could be monitoring and enforcing the current sanctions regime in all areas. Finally, the third is a combination strategy. And I'd like to propose this combination strategy as a realistic approach, which includes coercive pressures today and promises of cooperation for tomorrow. So a lot of scholars like Rupal, Mehta, and other scholars argue that nuclear reversal is more likely when the combination strategy is selected. So the coercive pressures can include maximum sanctions, maybe focuses on human rights of citizens in North Korea, maybe how to ensure the safety of North Korean refugees worldwide, how to let North Korean citizens know that there are profitable exit options by providing outside information. But maximum pressure is not the end. At the same time, it's important to promise the possibility of cooperation from economic, from military, and from political perspectives. So these audacious initiatives, again, try to provide food, energy, and infrastructure investments once North Korea just comes to the bargaining table. So that's different. So the role of ROK-US alliance could be designing these coercive pressures together for today, but also promises of cooperation for tomorrow. All right, so on top of these three strategies, deterrence, sanctions, and combination strategy, I think, in the end, I would like to mention that it's critical to understand that denuclearization requires patience. So patience. So for how long, you may ask, and until domestic and international conditions are all satisfied for denuclearization. So if you think about domestic and international conditions that are met when JCPOA was reached, I think you would probably understand what that means. So I'm not sure when that will be, but I'm pretty sure that that day will come. I'll stop here. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. I think Tae is a bird lover. He wants to just hear birds sing, Okay. All right, kidding. Next, we'll listen to what Dr. Eric Brewer has to say. Eric, please.
Great, thank you so much, and thank you for having me. I'll begin by saying that I think the title of this session, fostering that sustainable path to denuclearization, while certainly a laudable goal, perhaps the more urgent task is, rather than finding that pathway, avoiding falling off a cliff. In addition to, I think, the challenges associated with convincing North Korea to give up its nuclear weapons that my colleague Tae so eloquently laid out, I see three additional emerging or perhaps emerged issues that are going to complicate things further. And I think if we ever hope to get back on a pathway towards denuclearization, the United States and South Korea are going to have to work together to address these challenges, and I'll talk through what those are. The first is growing nuclear risks in the Indo-Pacific writ large, and I think this includes several things. I think it includes the risk of nuclear use, specifically the risk that a conventional conflict will escalate to nuclear use. I also think it includes the risk, well actually not the risk, it's reality at this point, vertical proliferation. So countries that have nuclear weapons increasing the size of their nuclear arsenals. And I guess I'll begin with that latter point on proliferation. As we all know, North Korea is expanding dramatically the size of its nuclear weapons and missile capabilities. China is undergoing a massive nuclear buildup and modernization. And some of the estimates that are out there project that if that goes forward without any sort of, if that trajectory just kind of continues its current course, that China could have sort of rough parity, so to speak, with the United States when it comes to operational nuclear weapons in the middle of next decade, by the middle of next decade. I can't imagine that those developments will not also have an impact on the thinking on their nuclear needs in India, which could also have an impact on the thinking of their nuclear needs in Pakistan. On the risks of nuclear use, here again, I think there's several that one could highlight, but I'll highlight just one in the context of the Korean Peninsula in particular. I should also sort of say and start out that I think Russia's invasion of Ukraine and the threats made by Putin have concentrated a lot of thinking on the risks of nuclear use in the European theater. But I would also offer, too, that we shouldn't ignore the risks of nuclear use in Asia and in Indo-Pacific. And I think those existed prior to Russia's invasion, and I think those are going to continue to exist, unfortunately, for the time being in the future. But why? What are these risks of nuclear use, and why are they high? Again, on the Korean Peninsula, we see North Korea. Despite the sort of the advances that they've made, Kim Jong-un is still deeply concerned about the survivability of his capabilities in a conflict, and so he's intent on taking steps to mitigate those vulnerabilities because of the fear that they could be eliminated, and in part to try and to address these steps by North Korea. South Korea has adopted a series of measures, the so-called kill chain strategy, or the three-axis system, which in part seeks to threaten the decapitation of the North Korean regime in response to WMD use, and seeks to use strike preemptively to prevent North Korea's use of WMD. And then, of course, you have North Korea responding to these developments by adopting policies, postures, and practices to enable it to launch nuclear weapons even faster and earlier in a conflict. And the end result, of course, is that warning times are shrinking and decision-making timelines are drastically reduced, which raises the risks of nuclear use in a conflict. And so the bottom line on this is that growing nuclear risks are going to make denuclearization more difficult, I would offer, but also perhaps suggest that we may be better served, at least in the near term, by focusing on some of these nuclear risks that are being generated in the region. The second development that I think is happening that has implications, and I think there are mostly negative as far as I can think of, not only for the prospects of denuclearization of North Korea, but also the alliance as a whole, and that is the discussions within South Korea about the development of nuclear weapons. In my view, South Korea moving forward with nuclear weapons would probably doom the prospects of any denuclearization of North Korea. To the contrary, I think that would cause North Korea to accelerate its development of nuclear weapons and a buildup of its nuclear arsenal. And I also think South Korea moving forward with that would put the alliance under severe strain. I think the Washington Declaration had a lot of useful elements to it that I think helped put a lid, perhaps, on some of this discussion, but I think the strategic drivers remain and are probably not going away anytime soon. And so, I think going forward with those ambitions to develop nuclear weapons would certainly be a risky gamble by South Korea and could potentially come with some particularly negative consequences, right? I mean, there's a series of discretionary measures and penalties that the United States could put in place, but there's also mandatory penalties as well, right? For example, if South Korea were to test a nuclear weapon, that would trigger the suspension of certain types of assistance and aid, including military sales. It would have really negative effects on South Korea's domestic nuclear industry. Under the NSG, the Nuclear Suppliers Group, countries would be required to end cooperation with South Korea's civil nuclear program, including the sale of uranium fuel. And so those are just a couple of examples. And of course, while it may not break the alliance, I think it would place it under strain. And I think that would distract and detract from what, in my view, are the far more important efforts underway to strengthen South Korean conventional forces, to increase interoperability, to increase coordination between US and South Korean conventional forces to support extended deterrence, which I think is actually one of the most important elements that's called out in the Washington Declaration, and that's included as a work stream under the Nuclear Consultative Group as well. And the third development that I see that is going to make it more difficult to move forward with denuclearization and address the threat from North Korea writ large is rising tensions between great powers, and specifically the United States and Russia, and the United States and China. And this was discussed a little bit, some of these dynamics by Inhan earlier. But I think for China and for Russia, I think they increasingly see the North Korea issue through the prism of great power competition and geopolitical tensions. And I think for Russia, that's particularly true regarding the war in Ukraine. And so I think this is making them, Russia and China, that is less willing to impose costs on North Korea and more willing to provide a degree of diplomatic cover. On China, some of the examples have already been noted, but Chinese diplomats have come out and flat refused to impose additional UN sanctions on North Korea if it moves forward with an additional nuclear weapons test. China has also been unwilling to move forward with its commitment that it made in past UN Security Council resolutions to apply additional sanctions on North Korea following an additional ICBM test. And I think the latest panel of experts report makes clear that China's enforcement of UN Security Council sanctions is fairly lackluster. I think it's a fairly similar story on the Russia side as well, although the change there has perhaps been more noticeable and more dramatic. We saw during the meeting between Putin and Kim in Russia, they did the visit to the Russian space facility. I think that's quite telling in terms of the assistance that may be on offer, that North Korea may be interested in. Kim, of course, has pledged full support for Russia's war in Ukraine. And there's been reports that North Korea is providing quite a bit of ammunition and artillery shells for that war. And so I think as long as Russia sees North Korea as helpful in that regard, it's going to be inclined to provide some not only just diplomatic cover for North Korea, but also assistance in the form of fuel and food and other types of aid. And so I think the bottom line is that North Korea sees these developments happening and that it is working to exploit them. And they serve as a sort of pressure relief valve that I think work to further reduce Kim Jong-un's incentives to take any positive steps on the nuclear program. So where does all of this leave us, and what should the United States and South Korea do moving forward? I'll just offer up a couple of thoughts that I think some of which will build on conversations that were had in the earlier panel. I think, as we move forward with strengthening deterrence and extended deterrence in our alliance partnerships, I think we also have to be cognizant of the nuclear risks in the region. We had some good news the other day that the United States and China have agreed to resume arms control talks. Obviously, that's a very long and uncertain road, but I think that is at least a positive first step. On the nuclear debate within South Korea, I would say that that the United States has to continue to quietly make clear that the risks of moving down that pathway are counterproductive. And then again, meanwhile, while continuing to work towards strengthening extended deterrence in the alliance, I think focusing on those elements of the Washington Declaration that are really important in actually helping strengthen that relationship and and extended deterrence. And I think that's crisis communications and focused on conventional forces as well. And then finally, on North Korea specifically, I think the administration is doing the right thing by being willing to meet with North Korea at any time, while again also working to strengthen the alliance. But I think if and when we get back to dialogue, I think we do need to focus more, at least in the near term, on sort of arms control and risk reduction measures, while keeping the goal of denuclearization out there as a long-term objective. I think we can do both of those things, but I don't think we need to hold the goal of denuclearization hostage to other steps that could perhaps be done in the near term that would serve benefit. And I'll just conclude by saying, because of a lot of those steps that could be taken to enhance transparency, enhance communication, and reduce risk will impact elements of extended deterrence and the U.S.-South Korea alliance. I think all of that is going to have to be done in close coordination and consultation and really working together if indeed we embark on that pathway.
All right, thank you, Eric. As our last speaker, we'll listen to what Dr. Elaine Byrne has to say. Elaine, please.
Thank you. Good afternoon, and annyeonghaseyo. I don't want to mislead you. I don't want to lose all my credibility with this audience, so I'm going to begin by saying I'm not honorable. To use the title, one has to be Senate confirmed. And as Deputy Assistant Secretary, I did not have to be Senate confirmed, as did Bob Einhorn and Marshall Billingsley. So while I hope to be honorable, I can't use the title. I'm glad the previous panelist addressed North Korean denuclearization, because I don't have a lot to say about it. That wasn't my government job, and I don't have any insightful answers that haven't already been thought of and tried. I would like to make 4 points, though. First, I don't see Kim Jong-un giving up his nuclear weapons anytime soon. That does not mean that I, quote, accept, unquote, North Korea as a nuclear nation. It does mean that he's done enough missile tests and nuclear tests that the defense planner in me thinks that we'd better focus strongly on deterring his nuclear use and aggression under the nuclear shadow. Second, it seems to me that the best way to do that is to make it clear through words and deeds that if Kim Jong-un attacks South Korea, he's also taking on the U.S. and likely a much broader coalition of countries against him. As for deterring nuclear use, I think that the 2022 Nuclear Posture Review has it right when it said that any nuclear attack by North Korea against the U.S. or its allies, partners, is unacceptable and will result in the end of that regime. There is no scenario in which the Kim regime could employ nuclear weapons and survive. Why do I think that's the right thing to deter nuclear use? Because I do, after some study and listening to people who do know a lot about North Korea, think that survival of his regime is what he values most. And so I think that is a very powerful deterrent message. Third, effective deterrence, whether that's nuclear or non-nuclear deterrence, means coordinating the things that South Korea does for itself, for its own defense, plus the things that the ROK and the U.S. do together, and there are many of those, plus the nuclear capabilities that the U.S. uniquely brings to the alliance. When I say that, that doesn't mean that South Korea has no role in nuclear deterrence. Our countries can work to identify ROK non-nuclear capabilities that can help enhance the effectiveness of U.S. nuclear deterrence operations, just as many of our NATO allies do. But I do think that the key is continuous dialogue among our political and military officials, and even maybe among former officials and experts and so forth, that's the key to effective deterrence and keeping ahead of the threat as it evolves, and it will evolve. In my view, we've talked about the Washington Declaration some today already. In my view, the most significant aspect of that is when President Biden said that the United States commits to make every effort to consult with the ROK on any possible nuclear weapons employment on the Korean Peninsula. I mean, it is the strongest statement that any of our allies have. It's substantively the same thing that our NATO allies have, and as of now, we don't have a Washington Declaration type statement with Japan, though I certainly think that will have to come as well. But that is a very strong commitment to an ally. I think I see all the other items in the Washington Declaration that get a lot more public attention. You know, the nuclear consultative group, a good step. All these other steps that I'll talk about in a minute are necessary implementation steps for that consultation commitment. The other things that are in it sort of build on what we've been doing for some time. They build on it and elevate it. We've had efforts, we've had a deterrence dialogue since 2010. The Extended Deterrence Policy Committee started then, and then that was renamed the Deterrence Strategy Committee when it combined with the Counter-Missile Capabilities Group, and it took on more than just the extended part, it took on what we both do together. And then another group was added in 2016 with the higher level State and Defense Extended Deterrence Consultative and Strategy Committee. So consultations are not new, but the Washington Declaration raised the level, and I think it further institutionalizes those consultations with the Nuclear Consultative Group. Tabletop exercises are in the Washington Declaration. That's not new. I know we did them often in the EDPC, DSC, but the Declaration does increase the level of those TTXs. Visits of strategic assets are not new, but this ups the level with an SSBN port visit in Busan in July. Planning together is not new, but the Washington Declaration is an evolution toward greater integration of planning and assets for deterrence. And that includes both the U.S.'s assets and South Korea's. With real nuclear conventional integration and consulting before acting, that also means not just more insight for South Korea into our planning, including nuclear planning, but also our insight into South Korea telling us what their plans are for their conventional strike and consulting before KMPR, kill chain strikes, that sort of thing. So there's integration and more integration of planning on both sides. It gets to that. My biggest takeaway from 40 years of working with allies was, don't surprise your allies. You can have discussions, you can disagree, you can debate, you can do all those things, but don't surprise each other. So I think that's part of what this integration will bring to bear. My final point is one that I cannot prove, but it's one that I believe. That the threat may change from North Korea, capabilities evolve, ours, yours, theirs. The names and the levels of consultative groups may change some more, but that the 70-year U.S. commitment, a commitment that is, it's not just in words, it's 30,000 troops in South Korea. It's our nuclear forces that are in the region, whether you see them or not, they're always in the region. That commitment to ROK security, I think, is constant and enduring. Can't prove it, but I believe it. I don't want to hear the birds chirp, so I will say 감사합니다, and await your questions.
All right, thank you, Elaine. Okay, we have one discussion. Professor Joshua Byun from Boston College. You have 8 minutes, Joshua. Would you please?
Great, thank you. Thank you each of you for your fascinating and insightful presentations. This is clearly a complex and multifaceted issue, and each of you really put a finger on a key aspect of the problem in various ways. So what I want to do in my comments is give each of you the opportunity to elaborate and expand upon some of the thoughts that you shared. And I'm going to do this with a series of targeted questions. And I just, as an overarching comment, I just have to say, collectively, listening to the presentations that you gave, and honestly, it made me more sobered and more pessimistic about the prospects of denuclearization. I have to agree with Eric that maybe even the title of this theme, our session, is somewhat misleading, and that perhaps aiming for denuclearization might really just be making us all tilt at windmills. This is a difficult, perhaps almost intractable problem, and I want to see if I can get you to change this bleak outlook on my part as well as the audience's part, okay? So Inhan, during your presentation, you forcefully made the point that the ROK-US alliance should be the beginning and the end of our denuclearization efforts, right? So it was very clear to me how it's the basis, it's the groundwork, it is the beginning of denuclearization efforts. Can you elaborate a little bit more on how it's supposed to be the end, right? The reason is, so you said the function of the ROK-US alliance in this effort is first, make the North Koreans realize that its nuclear threats are futile, right? It won't work. Number 2, a tool to drain its scarce resources, right? And my kind of question was, this has been a constant, right? That's what the ROK-US alliance has been doing for decades and decades, right? So there's a constant, but on the other hand, North Korea's nuclearization efforts have been a constant as well. And what we want is variation in the dependent variable. We want them to swerve from this nuclearization pathway to an alternative pathway. And how can a constant lead to change in this dependent variable, right? Constant can't explain a constant, right? That's just, can you kind of elaborate a little bit more on how the ROK-US alliance is supposed to be the end, right? The end of our denuclearization efforts. I can see where's the beginning, these constant elements that you laid out, but how is it the end, right? For Tae-hee, I have two questions. So first, you're an expert on economic statecraft, right? And as an expert on economic statecraft, you know more than anyone that a key fundamental issue, difficulty with economic sanctions is the problem of transshipment, right? The South Koreans and the US try to cut off North Korea from international trade, from core supplies, so on and so forth. But what this does, it gives opportunities to other states that do have maintained partnerships with North Korea to expand their trade, right? Import more of this material and give it to North Korea, right? This is what accounts for a lot of the ineffectiveness associated with economic sanctions, the problem of transshipment, right? Because these countries are embedded in a network of trading relations, right? So how do we overcome this problem, right? Even if South Korea and the US go all the way in trying to cut off North Korea from international materials, it maintains other partnerships where it could find alternate suppliers for those things, right? My second question for you, Tae-hee, is you laid out this audacious initiative on the part of the Yoon government, and you said this is different in that it uses a combination of coercion but also potential inducements, right? And the idea is if you give up, if you deviate from your current pathway, we will give you this kind of support. Can you elaborate on how this idea is different from, say, initiatives pursued by the Lee Myung-bak administration, right? Their whole idea was that if you give up on your nuclear program, we will help you increase your standard of living, right? Help you increase your income, and that didn't really pan out. So where is the change? How is it different from previous initiatives, right? And previous initiatives seem to also have combined some measure of coercion and inducement. For Eric, so you laid out a series of reasons why I and many people should probably be bleak about the prospects of denuclearization, right? And in my view, these elements that you laid out really add up to the idea that this North Korean nuclear problem might be what's called a wicked problem in the field of public policy, right? It's a problem that you don't solve, it's something you cope with, it's something you live with, right? Tame problems are problems that you go and solve. Would you agree with that assessment? Is the collective impact of your comments basically leading to this conclusion that you might not bring yourself to say, but it's almost invariable, right? That, you know, coping with nuclear risks in the region, right? Not only on the peninsula, but on the region as a whole with the vertical proliferation among the established nuclear powers to expand their nuclear arsenals. Has this turned into basically a coping problem? That's my question to you. For Elaine as well, same question. You said you're not accepting North Korea as a de facto nuclear power, but all the solutions you laid out, strengthening deterrence, you know, integrating conventional operations with nuclear operations, strengthening security dialogue. To me, it all seems to point to the conclusion that this is a problem that we're going to live with and cope with and not solve, right? There is no sustainable path to North Korean denuclearization. So I don't want to put you on the spot, Elaine, but is that the conclusion that we just have to accept from your insights? In closing, this is a question that I will pose to all of you in closing, and we could talk about it during the Q&A more. So recently I had a conversation with my teacher, John Mearsheimer. He got a lot of flack recently for saying that North Korea has become a de facto nuclear power, right? And probably, you know, one of the side effects of this, under-recognized side effects of this, is that it has a stabilizing effect on peninsular relations, right? The US used to make military threats against North Korea all the time. Now it rarely does. It's because it's become a nuclear power. And he got a lot of flack for this. And what he told me is, I think they all know it in their hearts, but they just can't bring themselves to say it. And I want to ask each of you, is this true? Do you all know it in your hearts, but you just can't bring yourself to say it? But all of the comments that you're making suggest to me that you don't see this as a solvable, tame problem. You're treating it as a wicked problem that we have to cope with and live with as far as our analytical lenses can see. So I want to hear what each of you have to say about that. So, Enhan, you can start.
All right. Very Okay, energetic discussion we have. Okay, great. Let us give some time for to each presenters to respond to these concerns, comments, and questions. And then if you're willing, you can sort of comment on other presenters' presentation. Okay? Inhan, will you go first, please?
Oh, yes. Thank you, Joshua. Thank you for giving me opportunity to elaborate what I meant by the US-ROK alliance as a beginning and an end of the denuclearization of North Korea. So when I wrote down that this is going to beginning and end of the denuclearization of North Korea, DPRK, I didn't approach it kind of the kind of a scholarly kind of perspective, rather kind of policy implications, and then more like kind of the policy things just in my mind. So let me elaborate this part. When I said it's gonna the ROK US alliance has it's kind of important, and it's gonna beginning and end of the denuclearization process. So I can think of kind of three things throughout the process of denuclearization. From the first session and from the second session here, we all agree that denuclearization of North Korea is really difficult and it'll be very challenging. That's kind of bottom line. But anyway, that's not the one. That's the one we can abandon. That's one we should keep in mind. And let's say that once we started kind of talk about denuclearization and the negotiation with North Korea, there are a few things, a few stages involved. But first of all, at this moment, again, in the middle of my presentation, I told you that we are kind of South Korea. We have nothing. I mean, we don't have nuclear weapons, but North Korea has. So without the U.S. support from the U.S., it will be very difficult for us to directly tackle with deal with North Korean issues. So I would say that I would love to say that I would like to emphasize that the ROK U.S. alliance is kind of linchpin for the survival and security of South Korea. At the same time, it is just the linchpin for stability of the South Korea and on the Korean Peninsula. So that's kind of first thing, it's kind of unchanging fact. And the second, when you say that once we have kind of talk about denuclearization, let's say that the audacious initiative works, and then the new president, incumbent President Biden and new President Donald Trump, if he becomes elected, then let's say that there's another kind of the momentum for talk between the U.S. and the North Korea. Well, we know that ROK U.S. alliance issue will come up in the middle because the essence, the key for North Korea's kind of the topic for the negotiation, that is presence of the ROK and U.S. alliance on the Korean Peninsula. But still, it's kind of the thing we can't make we can put the issue on the table. This is kind of thing we carry in our heart, and that's kind of essential part of the our survival and security. And the third, well, hopefully, let's say that someday in the long term, the denuclearization of DPRK was done. Even though when the job is done and completed, I believe the US-ROK and ROK-US alliance should be there, and it has some roles to play for the future on the still stability on the Korean Peninsula, and then for the stability in the East Asia, and in the long term, the ROK and U.S. alliance should play important roles in the maintenance of peace around the world. So that's why I said that this is kind of the beginning and the end of the denuclearization. Thank you.
All right, Tae, your turn.
So two questions. First one is about economic sanctions. So scholars say that sanctions don't work as expected, and the data show that imposed sanctions about 1/3 effective, and when you include both threat stage and imposition stage, more than half successful. So still it's not great. And one of the reasons that sanctions are not so successful is because of the problem that you suggested, sanctions busting, the third country effect. Whatever it is, it's the existence of this black knight country. So Like for example, like 1979 grain embargo against Soviet Union, and Soviet Union basically tried to find the sanction busting country, and Argentina volunteered, and grain embargo didn't work as expected. So, I mean, it's not new. And I think the one way to overcome that problem is to focus on financial sanctions instead of trade sanctions. So this sanction busting or transferring basically focus on trade sanctions. So trade sanctions may be official sanctions busting or private sanctions busting, whatever they are. It's all focused on trade sanctions. But when it comes to financial sanctions, it's quite different because the third players, other players, in case of financial sanctions, actually behave in cooperation with the sanctioner. So there is actually a market reinforcing effect. So in trade sanctions, there are a lot of sanction busting, third country effect, but that's the other way around in case of financial sanctions. So I guess one suggestion could be that maybe United States or United Nations or other countries may want to focus on trying to find out this financial sources of North Korea for nuclearization. That's one way to overcome this third country effect. And for North Korea especially, I think it's China that makes this UN sanctions not so effective. So and it's not new. So I guess if we think about when sanctions worked well, maybe 2016, 2017. At that time, I think United States and China were okay. I mean, compared to now. So I guess this U.S.-China relationship is affecting the effectiveness of UN sanctions too. So I guess this great power competition can be another variable that can overcome this third country effect. All right, so the second question, audacious initiative. I guess I'm trying to introduce this kind of nicer parts of this audacious initiative. So theoretically speaking, I like the audacious initiative because it clearly differentiated between the bargaining stage and enforcement stage, and in between there is agreement. And I think the Fearon's 98 article, and so there is this strategic interactions at the bargaining stage based on the expectation about the enforcement stage. So when it comes to denuclearization issue, because enforcement stage, the enforcement is going to be tight, you think that, if you agree upon something at the bargaining stage, you will not be able to deviate at the enforcement stage. Therefore, you bargain harder and harder. So therefore, failure comes at the bargaining stage rather than enforcement stage. And I think, what that means is that there are different mechanisms, different dynamics at the bargaining stage and enforcement stage. And I think audacious initiative clearly distinguishes the two stages from each other. And I think that's a great sort of improvement based on, compared to the previous Lee-Myung-bak administration's policy. And practically speaking, so at the bargaining stage, audacious initiative says that basically you don't have to make a explicit concession, right? So once you come to the bargaining table, and once you come to the bargaining table, the economic inducements in infrastructure, food, and energy will be provided in advance. So it's not like reciprocal thing, right? So it's like come to the bargaining table, because that is important, right? Because this is the denuclearization bargaining. And once you come to the bargaining table, I'm going to give you this economic inducements, and let's talk about it, right? So I think it's more advanced, and it understands the core dynamics of denuclearization bargaining. That's yeah.
Okay, Tae, you need birds. All right, Eric, your turn.
Thank you. That's a great question. Actually, if you don't mind, I'd also like to say just a quick comment on the sanctions as well. Because when I was responsible for a portion of North Korea policy from 2017 to 2018 at the National Security Council, so I had some exposure to this issue, and I just thought, a couple of broad comments on implementing sanctions writ large. This isn't specifically with regard to North Korea, although I think it certainly applies to North Korea. There's a lot of focus in the sort of the popular public discussion on sanctions. There's a lot of focus on the actual sanction or the actual designation, and of course those really, they matter, right? What you're sanctioning matters a lot, but there's also the political energy and will that go into sanctions and that go into, a quote, maximum pressure campaign or into a sanctions campaign, and the amount of energy and political will required to sustain that over time is a very important factor, and also very hard to achieve and very hard to sustain, especially across administrations. And then also it's not, again, it's not just the actual measure, but it's also the diplomatic follow-through as well, right? I mean, because it's those diplomatic engagements where you're actually doing a fair amount of the enforcement and making sure that countries understand what a given UN Security Council resolution or what a given US executive order requires, and asking them to take various actions related to that. So I think those are also factors that matter a lot as well when it comes to sanctions enforcement. On the question of the wicked problem, is it one you don't solve? Is it one you have to cope with? I guess I have a couple of different reactions to that question. The first reaction would be, yes, North Korea is a wicked problem. And I would love to hear an argument to the contrary. My second reaction is, that doesn't mean we have to, quote unquote, recognize or give some sort of formal recognition to North Korea as a nuclear weapons state. And it doesn't mean we should, I think, completely abandon the policy of denuclearization. My third reaction to the question is regarding, this sort of premise about wicked problems, just having to cope with them, is that, I mean, that's kind of the reality that's the nature of reality in policymaking writ large, right? Oftentimes we don't get our preferred policy. Oftentimes we fail in what the initial goal is that we want to achieve. And so we have to adapt, we have to amend, we have to come up with plan B and plan C. This is not unique to North Korea, right? I mean, this has been a feature of US non-proliferation policy throughout history, right? When we've failed to initially achieve that first objective, we try and prevent the problem from getting worse. And so I think that's an inherent element for policymaking, especially when it comes to non-proliferation. And then I guess my fourth reaction to that is, we can, I think, I don't want to be too defeatist, right? It's something we can manage and have to manage, but we also, I think, have to be open to the possibility, however remote, that things can change, and that we have to be ready to take advantage of those changes, right? I mean, maybe it just comes with getting older or something like that, but I feel like I'm increasingly humble in my ability to predict the future. And so, as remote a chance as denuclearization is right now, and even really as unlikely as it may seem that we're going to get back into a dialogue with North Korea where really any of these, risk reduction or arms control options are really feasible, I think we've got to, again, recognize that could happen and that things can change.
Well,
Thanks. Go ahead.
sorry.
Go ahead. Yeah.
Since I'm even older than Eric, I will say, I don't give up on, I don't admit that, no, it's just a nuclear North Korea, we have to live with it forever. I don't know how to solve the problem. and I haven't read anything that leads me to believe, oh, there's the perfect answer. But I don't give up on it because I can't see the future. That's one reason. Things can change. I have been wrong about things in the past. Let me assure you, when I was in graduate school, a colleague from graduate school at CSIS keeps reminding me that in 1978 or so, at 9, I said, I can't imagine that Germany is going to reunify in my lifetime. So I was wrong about that. So I don't pretend that I can know what's going to happen, but another reason I don't admit North Korea as a nuclear state is because my ally doesn't want me to, okay? I would not recommend that the international community recognize North Korea as a legitimate nuclear state. So I also take exception, I think, to the question, but we are where we are. So why did I talk more about deterrence? Because I think we do have to cope with a country that has done a lot of nuclear tests, a lot of missile tests. How do we make sure they don't think, how can we do the best possible job of trying to ensure that they don't think they can either use their nuclear weapons or undertake aggression under the nuclear shadow? So yeah, that's what I focused on, is I guess you can call that coping with where we are today. But it doesn't mean North Korea is forever, or certainly even legitimately, a nuclear weapon state.
So if I may add just one comment.
Please.
It seems to me that you're saying there should be a disjuncture of sorts between our declaratory policy and our substantive policy. In our declaratory policy, you say our goal is denuclearization. We don't accept North Korea as a nuclear state. Substantive policy, we cope with the problem. Is that a good way to put it?
If our policy is over the long term, we want to see it denuclearized. We just don't know how to do that right. We don't have the right levers to make that happen right now. I don't know that that's not substantive. That is substantive. So yeah, coping with what is, and substantively wanting to work towards something that's different. They're both substantive.
All right, we have 30 minutes remaining. Our audience has been very patient. We'll go over to answering the questions from audience. We have quite a few good questions, and as a moderator, I'll try to answer as many questions as we can, okay, to do service to your patience. So let me read, the questions one by one, and any of you, presenter or discussant, have something to say, then just say it. All right, but just make sure your comments or answer are brief and to the point, please. If a nuclear deal is somehow agreed to with North Korea, how can negotiators ensure that the agreement is long-lasting? What lessons on sustainability can be learned from past deals with North Korea? Anyone? This is not a dictation test, You better speak. All right, academics. This is an academic question, so you guys get to,
This is all about like monitoring and enforcement of the agreement, right? Suppose that there is a deal, and then maybe North Korea has an incentive to deviate from that deal. If that incentive exists, then probably international community, United Nations, maybe United States, should put efforts on monitoring, whether North Korea is abiding by the agreement well. And if there is a violation, then there should be some enforcement mechanisms that should be running.
Inahan.
So let's say the nuclear deal is done. Sorry. Okay. So let's say the nuclear deal is done. But the thing is, it involves many different processes, such as the inspection first, and we need to see what North Korea's kind of nuclear arsenal and what kind of things do they have, and there will be kind of very complicated process of what the international society will do for each stage. So the thing is. Well, how to make it stay on the course? Well, we have to decide kind of what kind of incentives we can do to North Korea before even the real denuclearization process begins. So I would say that first of all, the first condition will be kind of very close consultation among the parties concerned and what to do and what's kind of red line and what's kind of things kind of the range we can keep some room for action. So I think that's going to predetermine the consultation and coordination among the parties concerned. I think that's a very important thing to do.
All right, great. Next question.
Can I chime in?
All right.
Just two comments. Thank you. From the non-academic perspective. I mean, I think one of the things that's going to be important to a long-lasting agreement is one that's also the hardest, which was hinted at earlier. It's the monitoring and verification aspect. I think, what I think the JCPOA tells us is that there's going to be a lot of focus on that element of any deal, and it's going to be one that is going to have to be sort of stand up to the test of scrutiny, at least politically here in the United States. And so I think that's a very, very challenging one here, both historically with North Korea, but nevertheless one that we're going to have to grapple with. That's important. The other factor the other point I would make in terms of what can help sustain a deal over time, I think is obviously giving North Korea a stake in the success of that deal. And one way that we at NTI have put some thought into that is looking back at the Cooperative Threat Reduction Program as a potential model for elements of a denuclearization agreement. And that is basically looking at ways in which, in the case of North Korea, personnel and industries associated with the nuclear weapons program can be sort of reoriented towards non-nuclear weapons purposes. And again, looking back at the use of that effort following the fall of the Soviet Union. So those are just two thoughts I would throw on the table.
Great. If there's no other, all right. Let's move on to the next exciting question. What role will China and Russia play in attempt to denuclearize North Korea? Are there certain actions that China and Russia can take to pressure or induce Pyongyang to reduce reliance on nuclear weapons?
So for the question about China and Russia's role in denuclearizing North Korea, I think China understands what they need to do. China is not a developing country anymore. It portrays itself as a great power, kind of standing neck and neck with the United States, or hopefully to stand neck and neck shortly. But the thing is, the reason why China is not respected to be considered that way, that is, China has not played kind of important enough role in international politics, especially in resolving many difficult issues, including North Korean nuclear crisis. So China's role, that's kind of contribution could be big, and that's what they have to carry in mind. And of course, kind of difference is China want to deal with North Korea's nuclear issues according to their own preference. That's a big one. But if we must start from kind of the common ground that nuclear non-proliferation, that's kind of common, is kind of respect to norms in international politics, and that's what China, the Beijing government, wants to respect, and actually they need to put into practice.
Any other? No?
I'm wrestling with, this issue of China and whether they would like to honor the rules of the international order or rewrite them to their own benefit. And I'm not sure which way it would play with North Korea nuclear. I mean, there have been times that it seems that China is annoyed by some of the moves that North Korea made. That's some years ago. Are there reasons in the future that they might say, no, really, North Korea, this is not in China's interest, as we are trying to rewrite the rules of the international order to suit us, for you, North Korea, to have these. I don't know what it would take for that to happen, but I'd love to hear if others have thoughts on that.
Yes, for example, one thing I can think about making China pay a little more attention about North Korean issues, especially in the nuclear problem. One thing I have always thought about is I hope China understands that North Korean missiles can head anywhere, not just to Washington. Well, we think that North Korea is going to be primary enemies, U.S. and South Korea and Japan. So it looks like Beijing stands as a bystander for the whole crisis. But North Korean nuclear problem is not just about its enemies. It also involves everybody around the world, and especially for the past decade, North Korea has advanced its missile capabilities, which can fire its missiles everywhere around the world, and China it's also in the range of target. So this is kind of problem China should carry in their heart, even though it's kind of North Korea says that China is kind of an ally and a friend, but how can we trust the North Korea? That's kind of the thing I want to deliver to Beijing.
Any other responses? No? As a moderator, I'm trying very hard to moderate my urge to intervene and say something. I just keep moderating and managing time. Sorry, sick joke. All right. One important question I think our governments should be most interested in. What impact does the Washington Declaration have on attempts to denuclearize North Korea?
Well, since I talked about it, Washington Declaration, I think it strengthens the alliance. I would hope, and I would love to hear from my Korean colleagues, especially after this morning's panel, about whether that increased confidence or credibility of the United States, confidence in or credibility of, or not. But I think a strong alliance, an alliance that says to North Korea, in words and deeds, as I say, no, your nuclear, you cannot use your nuclear weapons or undertake aggression under that nuclear shadow because we are strong and we are arrayed against you. So I think that is what the Washington Declaration did for denuclearization. But it may be the way I read the Washington Declaration because of my background.
Koreans.
So I guess Washington Declaration significantly increased the credibility of ROK-US alliance. So I guess especially the ensuing creation of nuclear consultation group is very important because, well, first of all, as I said in my talk, this creation raised the audience cost of both United States and South Korea. United States basically. So so by publicly saying that I'm on South Korean side, and then I'm gonna help South Korea by using whatever. So, but by doing that publicly reputation will be on the line. Therefore, defection will be more difficult when the time comes. Therefore, the alliance credibility is improved, right? So that's kind of immediate effect. But I think what matters more is the institutionalization of this nuclear consultation group, right? So I think South Korea and United States should cooperate to institutionalize this NCG more and more, and that'll give the clear message to North Korea that if North Korea does anything crazy, then United States and South Korea, this ROK-US alliance, will not just sit quiet and will defend. We'll respond using with maximum capacity. So that way, I think institutionalization is also important.
Are we ready for next question? Just go ahead, please, Elaine.
I do have a question on the institutionalization. I agree with you that the more all the mechanisms that existed before and that were in the Washington Declaration, the more they are institutionalized, the more resilient they'll be, the more likely they will withstand changes in our country and in your country. However, what do you mean when you say institutionalization? What's the measure of merit? Is it the number of meetings of the NCG? Is it the number of TTX? What is the measure of merit?
So I think that's where some sort of creative thinking should come into play. I think there's no clear measurement of this institutionalization, but at least DOD of South Korea asked for example, like the frequency of meetings and official meetings, maybe the office in DC, for example, like so that the officers in South Korea can come and then stay here, communicating and so on, raising interactions with the officers in the U.S. That sort of interactions can increase some social capital or that kind of thing. So when the moment comes, the likelihood that United States will deviate will decrease. So that's right. So that's so another thing is that institutionalization is important because when certain leadership comes into play, maybe some leadership wins the election, maybe he or she has an incentive to get rid of whatever the previous government did, right? So Washington Declaration can be an example, right? So based on, next year's election, I don't know, something like this. So that domestic politics may change, but, once you have this institutionalization here and there by, interactions of the people, then, this will go on, right? So therefore, will increase the credibility of the alliance.
So, going back to Elaine's question about, what do you mean, what does it mean by institutionalization? How can we measure that? Well, kind of frequency of the meetings, interactions, on summit level important, and the minister level important, and the high-ranking, military officers level is all important. But more important is kind of concrete actions following the Washington Declaration, and without them, it's gonna all the kind of spirit or all the beautiful words coming out from that just empty talks. So I have followed up kind of the actions between the U.S. and ROK alliance since the April, and then I have been quite happy with that. So Washington has shown that we are serious about this declaration by sending the bombers and the submarines. At the same time, they revived, kind of joined the military exercises. So they all indicate that all actions, concrete actions follow. So we are really truly faithful about the promises made. So I think that's kind of very the important indicators and kind of measures we need to think about the strength about the alliance and the declaration. So that said, Washington the declaration has important audiences. One is, of course, South Korean, because they're South Korean people, and because we have a long doubt about actual commitment from the United States, whether we have kind of strong alliance on paper, but it would be operating if North Korea has kind of nuclear weapons able to hit mainland, the United States. But through with the Washington Declaration, yes, at the end, if that happens, North Korea will face kind of destruction. That's the end of the regime. So we are ready to use military forces. So that's kind of the all kind of the commitment shown through the Washington Declaration. So trust me, that's kind of the message coming out from Washington to Seoul. And the second thing is second audience I can think about the Washington Declaration is the North Korea. So I think this is kind of going back to your earlier question. That is, so it delivers kind of clear signal to Pyongyang that do you think that you have power to prevail or dominate over the Korean Peninsula, or do you want us to stay away from the issues on the Korean Peninsula? That's why you have developing nuclear weapons, but forget about it. We will be there anyway. So it's kind of clear message to the Pyongyang. You want to prevail? Then it will take time, and it's kind of long shot. That's kind of the other message coming out from Washington Declaration.
Could I just note that what each of you has said contrasts in my mind with what we heard from the first panel and the two Dr. Kims, Dr. Kim and Dr. Kim, where the emphasis was on the doubts about the U.S. credibility and coming. So anyway, it's just, I just remark on the difference between the two panels.
Okay, next question. What does denuclearization mean in the context of North Korea? How has Pyongyang's view on denuclearization shifted over the years? What does denuclearization mean in the context of North Korea? And how has the DPRK's view on denuclearization shifted over the years? What are we talking about, denuclearizing North Korea?
Me again?
Yeah.
I think I'm talking too much. But the big difference between about the view about denuclearization, one thing we should think about, that is denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula versus denuclearization of North Korea. So I'm happy that we get back to the point. So I mean the Washington Declaration and the Trilateral Summit among the U.S., Korea, U.S., and Japan. So we started talking about denuclearization of North Korea. But especially for the North Korea, the denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula is it includes everything, all kind of nuclear assets U.S. military has. So we have a very big discrepancy between what we think about denuclearization. We want North Korea to give up nuclear weapons, but what North Korea wants, going back to kind of story we discussed earlier in the panel in the morning, it involves arms control with the United States, so saying that, hey, the U.S. has kind of nuclear assets everywhere around the Korean Peninsula, not in Korean Peninsula, but around East Asia, and that's kind of threat. And when we talk about denuclearization, they should be on the table. So this is kind of a big problem we should keep in mind to start discussion, to negotiation with North Korea.
Good explanation. You should be a very good teacher. Okay, final set of questions. Under what conditions might the DPRK decide to pursue denuclearization? And related to that, what concessions would the US-ROK alliance have to make to strike a deal? I mean, induce North Korea to make that final decision.
I'm trying not to be flippant about this. Under what conditions might they decide to give up their nuclear weapons? If what you just said about how North Korea sees the situation, I don't know what's in Kim Jong-un's mind, but if what you just posited is the way they view it, then I suspect it would be the U.S. needs to get out of the region completely, certainly get out of South Korea, no troops there, take all of our nuclear weapons out of the region, except we have capabilities that can reach pretty far, even if they're not in the region. So I don't know, does that mean we have to denuclearize? And I guess China and Russia don't denuclearize? I don't know. And probably they would also want South Korea to give up all its conventional capability and that strong army, the strong military you have. I don't know what would, I mean, those are kind of extreme. Would that be enough for them? I don't know. I don't see it happening. I don't see that happening for reasons that appear obvious to me. If they're not, I'll be happy to go into that. But again, it depends on what they're after. And I was just riffing off what you had said earlier about how North Korea sees denuclearization.
If I could just perhaps reinterpret the question slightly and sort of ask the question of, what would it take to just get back into negotiations, right, or into dialogue? And I mean, I think I'm just asking myself the question of why Kim Jong-un decided to engage in the summit process with President Trump, right? What were the conditions that led to that process to play out, and what I think what would have to happen today? And I think one of the things that comes to mind is, something I referenced in my remarks, which is that I think, Kim Jong-un would have to believe that Russia and China are not going to provide that sort of pressure relief valve that I think they're playing right now. I think there's a lot of reasons why Kim Jong-un decided to engage in the summit process with President Trump, but I think one of the reasons was because I think he had seen sort of some of the sanctions that came in to play at the UN Security Council. He saw China taking a slightly different tact in those processes. And so I think there was a concern about that relationship and about where things may be going. So I think one of the things that would have to change is for him to believe that Russia and China were at least not going to tolerate some of the things that are ongoing, and we're going to clamp down a little bit more on sanctions. A variety of things perhaps as well, but I think those are two that may have to take a different direction.
Okay, Tae-hee?
I think one condition can be that if Kim Jong-un feels that he's secure about his regime and his survival politically, then probably, he'll be able to give up nuclear weapons. I think that's the core of this commitment problem. So.
All right, Joshua, how about you?
Let's say that the United States can give that regime security to North Korea. How would they know that it's going to change 10, 20, 50, 100 years down the road? They can't. There's the commitment problem you specified is completely true, but it's intractable, okay? Which is what makes this a coping problem. Mm-hmm. Just can't bring yourself to say it, I think.
Yeah. Really, right? So it depends on how you design.
Michael?
It depends on how you design the credible commitment mechanism, right? So
let me just add one quick aside. This morning in the panel, someone said, "Oh, you never know what's going to happen in the future. Who foresaw the collapse of the Soviet Union?" What I wanted to say, had to stop myself because I don't want to interject. Russia did not give up its nuclear weapons when the Soviet Union collapsed. In fact, the reason why it felt secure enough to roll back its conventional deployments in Eastern Europe was because of the security that was guaranteed by its massive nuclear arsenal. Nuclear weapons are the ultimate deterrence in international politics. North Korea can't find an alternative security measure that substitutes for, pound for pound for that kind of deterrent. Right? What institutional security guarantee can you design that will substitute pound for pound for a nuclear deterrent?
So I think that's the reason why that question you raised that was very difficult to answer, because what concessions we can give to North Korea in return for its kind of denuclearization. That is, we can think about what about kind of lifting economic sanctions and promising greater future with the prosperity, but that's not what North Korea wants. Think about it. Donald Trump brought Kim Yong-chol, one of the important person to New York and showing around the city how great the place is and it could be your future. But that's not what Kim Yong-chol bought. What they want is, as Joshua, you mentioned, this is kind of regime survival. Okay, so Kim's regime. So, but that's what international community cannot guarantee forever. So I would say that this is going to be very difficult. Even though the U.S., the international community promised that once you're on the track for denuclearization, everything will be fine, and Kim's regime, you will be fine. But even without that remark, it could be empty talk, given our experience in Libya and somewhere else.
All right. I'll give 30 seconds to each participant to say anything you'd like to wrap up. This is optional. Anybody? Joshua?
Thank you so much for your fascinating presentations. I really hope that there is some kind of path forward. I really do. And that's it, I suppose.
All right, no other person? No? Okay, it's time to wrap up. Oh, you, Taehi? Yeah,
so I think
your 30 seconds.
There's an example of South Africa that, voluntarily gave up on nuclear weapons. So, it's not really, so nuclear weapons themselves, not a necessary sort of condition, as you said. So I think depending on how to design this, again, credible common mechanism, maybe probably by the United States, but I kind of doubt, as I said. But, I think there should be a way to, guarantee the survival of the regime. And if Kim Jong-un buys that, I think, it can be resolved. And I think the road to unification, denuclearization and the regime issue maybe should be resolved kind of at the same time. So therefore, there should be some room for, addressing this issue together. It doesn't mean that, the collapse of the regime, but, trying to impose costs so that they can come outside voluntarily to reform. So I think we have to make that environment on and on. We have to keep trying to make that environment.
So let me go back to where I started from earlier. So the North Korean nuclear issue, denuclearization of North Korea, it will be very difficult thing to do. And we can read kind of minds and intention of North Korean leadership. But while kind of shutting its door down, still it kind of is advancing its nuclear capabilities. So let's start from kind of basics. We need to build up strong deterrence against North Korea. And for that purpose, let's make our alliance strong and stronger.
Elaine, Eric, nothing to say? Yeah,
같이
please.
갑시다.
Eric.
No, I agree with a lot of what's been said. I think, again, I would go back to some of the challenges I laid out at the outset, and I think, these are things that the United States and South Korea are going to have to think about together and to work through together, again, if we're ever to get back on any sort of pathway that resembles anything close to denuclearization.
Okay. As Professor Jae-chun Kim knows best, life is unfair. And out of 3 sessions of this forum, our session had to deal with the toughest and the most difficult question. But we tried hard and we did our best. And for that, we are all honorable, including you, Elaine. Okay, with that note, let us conclude this lively session, all right? Thank you very much. Thank you very much.